So thank you for accepting our interview and talking to us, Steve. I know that you just came back from Beijing on Wednesday night. You must be exhausted, so we really appreciate the opportunity for you to talk to us about your trip in Beijing, your thoughts on China, economy in general, and also on Hong Kong. I'm pretty sure, you know, your interview will generate a lot of interest once it's aired.
I was, during my 30-year career at Morgan Stanley, the bulk of my job was the chief economist for Morgan Stanley, and it was a global role. And I built an outstanding, highly regarded team of economists all over the world to really analyze, communicate, and provoke our clients on our views of the world economy. Mm-hmm. The turning point for me personally came in the Asian financial crisis of 1997 and 1998, when my team, who at the time was ranked as the #1 global economics team in the world, really had a poor understanding of what this crisis meant for our view of the world. And one by one of Asia's dynamic, so-called tiger economies was collapsing, and the world was in what at the time was billed as the first full-blown crisis of globalization. So I had been to China a few times by the late 90s, but I knew very little about the ins and outs of the Chinese economy. And I had a hunch, though, that China, one way or another, would hold the key to the end game of this Asian financial crisis. So in late 97, I started going to China every other month to see for myself what was going on inside of China. And it quickly became evident to me that China was cut from a very different cloth. It was not going to collapse like Thailand and Indonesia and South Korea, Taiwan, other heretofore dynamic economies. That China had a different approach, different resources, a different strategy, and would emerge from the crisis. I wrote in 1998 in the Financial Times my first article in the public press on China called "The Land of the Rising Dragon," that China would emerge as the new leader of the Pan-Asian global economy, supplanting Japan. My friends in Japan were distressed with me. My new friends in China were sort of embarrassed and didn't want the attention that article gave them. As I spent time with the minister and continued then to write about China as Morgan Stanley's chief economist, I received an invitation from Chinese officials to attend a new meeting that was being set up by then Premier Zhu Rongji, called the China Development Forum. And I was unable to accept the first invitation in 2000, but I went in 2001. It was a small meeting. It was a meeting that was very memorable, of one of active engagement and interaction between the few of us who came from the outside and the Chinese officials who were meeting with us immediately after the National People's Congress in March. And I have since been to every single China Development Forum since then. I've been to 24 in a row, including the one I attended this week, making me probably the longest standing foreign participant at the meeting. There's one other gentleman who's been to all of them, but he's Hong Kong Chinese, Professor Lawrence Lau, and I would consider him more of a Chinese participant. So I hold the record as the longest serving foreign participant. And I remember those early meetings like they were yesterday because they were highlighted by direct and open debate with Premier Zhu Rongji over the global economic outlook, our views on the Chinese economic outlook. He wanted to challenge and push and use that information to think about strategy and policy for China. Over the years, the China Development Forum took on a life of its own. It's now probably the most important open conference that China holds each year, and it still coincides with the immediate aftermath of the National People's Congress, or the two sessions as it's now known. But it was a brilliant idea to come out of the two sessions, bring the ministers of the State Council into a public forum when they would be forced to engage outside experts, whether they were academics or business people, on the policies and prospects for the Chinese economy. And Zhu Rongji had the provocative view that, if you can't defend your policies and your views and have them stress tested by the outside experts, then you don't deserve the seat you're sitting in. So it was a challenging platform, and I gave him, and still do, enormous credit for the concept and the execution of it. I have to say now, though, that 25 years later, the China Development Forum has lost that intimacy, that spirit of engagement and debate. It's bigger. It's dominated a lot by businessmen from outside who want to build their platforms inside of China. They get too much speaking time, in my view, to provide commercials about their commitment to China. They want to do business with China. And so the purpose of engagement with policymakers has been transformed into more of a commercial platform for foreign multinationals trying to build their businesses through commitments and exposure to China. And that was on full display this week. The new Premier, Li Qiang, spoke at last year's CDF in 2023 at the end of the China Development Forum. Historically, premiers would always meet with the group at the end. And in 2023, that was his first official speech to the participants in the China Development Forum. He chose not to do that this year, consistent with his canceling the press conference at the end of the National People's Congress. The decision was made not to meet with the foreign delegates at the end of the China Development Forum. Instead, he addressed the forum, the entire forum, including the media and the Chinese participants at the beginning. And it was basically a rehash of the work report he had delivered on March the 5th to the National People's Congress. Official proceedings of the China Development Forum concluded on this past Monday. There was a closed-door session on Tuesday for a few of us that I participated in and made some remarks that I think you have a copy of. And then on Wednesday, there was a small meeting that I did not go to with Xi Jinping for, I don't know, you would know better than me, maybe 24 foreign participants who had come to Beijing for the China Development Forum.
Mr. Ollins, probably you know him personally.
Yeah. He helped organize it along with Craig Allen of the U.S. China Business Council, and you know, most of the American participants are people I know very well, and you know, the message that I've been able to glean from them and from public accounts was pretty much in line with the message that the Premier gave earlier, and that other ministers, when they appeared at the China Development Forum, gave, and that is that China's fine, you know, we have some issues, but we've always dealt with our issues successfully in the past. We'll do it again. We're open for business. We want your business, was the official view from the Premier, and I gather from Xi Jinping. You know, there's concern about external geopolitical developments, especially the U.S.-China conflict, as there should be. But again, a steadfast commitment to their policies and to the medium to long-term prospects for the Chinese economy. And, you know, I raised a number of questions about that, and we can talk about them. You know, I have not yet spoken with any of my friends who were directly at the meeting. I have several that I will hopefully speak with over the weekend. I doubt if the questions were tough.
Okay.
Because that's not considered to be politically correct, which is too bad. I mean, you know, there should be tough questions that any leader should have to address, but how can I put this? The Chinese officials that I was dealing with before, during, and after the CDF have made it pretty clear that they don't want to hear about problems. They want to hear more about a constructive view of China. And if you have problems, they would prefer that they not be raised in public. So the idea that this group of 20 or 24 U.S. businessmen went into the Great Hall of People and delivered strong messages to Xi Jinping, I think it's a fabrication.
The Hong Kong delegation.
No, I mean, I would prefer that they speak for themselves. I don't want to characterize their view. The Hong Kong issue is obviously very important in China, and your questions indicate that you're going to ask me about my views of Hong Kong, but you know, I have written a few articles that raised serious concerns about the future of Hong Kong. And those touch on some sensitivities in Beijing, and largely for that reason, they asked me not to speak about that at the China Development Forum. So on Saturday before the forum, there was a meeting that was held by a group called CF40, who I've spoken as a Beijing-based organization that focuses on Chinese financial market policy, and I've addressed them several times in the past. And on this past Saturday at the Westin Hotel, there was a program where I debated Laura Cha, the chair of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, over my views on Hong Kong and the factors that underpinned my view, including the prospects for the Chinese and global economy. And Laura can speak for herself. I made 3 points in my Hong Kong argument that they were primarily economic, largely underscoring the linkage between the Hong Kong and the mainland economy, and secondly, raising concerns about the U.S.-China conflict having an adverse impact on Hong Kong trade, and then thirdly, the sensitive issue of political autonomy that was coming to a head the day that we were debating, because last Saturday, of course, is the day that the Article 23 national security law took effect. So I said all three of those really spelled trouble for Hong Kong in the years ahead. And Laura Cha agreed with 2 of my 3 points: the link to the Chinese economy, the adverse impact of the U.S.-China conflict, but she did not agree with my point on Hong Kong's political economy, or political autonomy, being compromised by either Beijing or its own soon-to-be implemented national security law under Article 23. So, we debated these things.
Would it be correct to say that you were the only one, or one of the very few people among the U.S. and China and Hong Kong delegation that raised some very valid and sort of, opposing or critical views about Hong Kong?
Well, I think very few people spoke directly to the Hong Kong issue. Most of the participants were aware of my views. There was very little pushback on the core argument, which is an economics argument as opposed to a political argument. There is a view, and I picked this up from my discussions with my friends in Hong Kong, as well as those who were in Beijing this week, that things got out of hand in 2019 with these mass demonstrations, and that was a political problem that was bordering on anarchy that had to be addressed. And so under a new security law, such as that which was just enacted, that provided the government with the mechanism to avoid a repetition of that. And whether or not that's appropriate, whether or not it goes too far, there's no question that it represents a new approach to dealing with political pressure, should they arise in the future in Hong Kong. And that sort of casts a long shadow over the idea of political and policy autonomy that Hong Kong has long been able to command under, one country, two systems. I can't speak for the citizens of Hong Kong, and I can't speak for the government of Hong Kong, other than to say that there was grave and understandable concern about what was going on in Hong Kong in the fall of 2019. And I remember going on CNBC at the time, and I was particularly critical of this basketball executive, Daryl Morey, I believe his name was, who decided to put out some tweet that he supported the people of Hong Kong during these massive demonstrations. And I said, look, these demonstrations have gotten out of hand. There's physical destruction of property. There is an outbreak of personal injury, and that should not be encouraged. It's bordering right now, I said at the time, on anarchy. And I think that that needs to be addressed before Hong Kong just erupts into a political frenzy that would clearly prompt Beijing to send in its own security response, and that needs to be avoided. I was criticized for saying that, but I felt it strongly at the time, and many of my more enlightened friends in Hong Kong, who are generally sympathetic to Hong Kong as a independent, dynamic economy, agreed with me at the time. Things were very precarious in the final months of 2019. But whether or not Article 23 legislation is appropriate to address that, that's history will have to tell us.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell our audience a little bit about your experience in Hong Kong? So you lived there for what?
5 years.
5 years. It's a long time, but also not a long time.
No.
Yeah. But I can understand, and I can feel, I can sense, your care and your love for the city. And then you even admit in your article that you love the city.
Yeah, I remember the first day, I landed, in the old Kai-Tak airport. It was frightening, and diving the plane right through the buildings of Kowloon, and it's an unnerving approach to this airport that has now since been abandoned and developed. But I think, if I'm not correct, that right in the harbor, beyond the old runway, was still the remnants of a jet that had gone off the runway and crashed into the harbor. So it was a different Hong Kong. But what I remember most about Hong Kong was then going to my company's offices in Central. We were located in Exchange Square at the time, and just looking out at the density of the urban architecture, and then walking through the streets and just feeling this palpable sense of energy. And that was a strong set of forces that really had sort of conveyed a sense of energy that I felt was contagious. Mm-hmm. And as I started going back to Hong Kong regularly on business, and then eventually as I was made chairman of Morgan Stanley Asia in 2007, I became a central part of the community. When you are the chairman, the head executive of a major international firm with a commitment to Hong Kong and a companion commitment to China, you are brought into the Hong Kong society and power structure as I won't say equal, but as a partner. And so I developed good relationships with the Hong Kong chief executives, past C.H. Tung, as well as his successors ever since. I was an active participant in a commission that was set up by Donald Tsang, I would say maybe a dozen years ago, on the future of Hong Kong competitiveness after the global financial crisis, and we met several times, and you know, I felt that personal commitment and attachment to the Hong Kong leadership as an integral aspect of my role as then a senior executive and investment banker in Hong Kong. I still have many good friends there, mainly professional but also personal, that I enjoy seeing when I go there. And I saw many of them over the past year during my visits. I was a little bit thrown when my FT article caused response from many of them. You know, I think the defensive posture taken by current and even past officials in Hong Kong is still asleep. They're not really sensing the nature of the wake-up call. They hit the snooze button after reading my article rather than came to life as they should have. Now, the one common response that I've heard from so many is, we've heard this before. And Hong Kong is, if anything, a historically resilient place. There were riots in the late 60s. There was concern over the time of the handover. There was the Asian financial crisis. There was SARS. There was COVID. Hong Kong's always come back, is the argument. And you, Steve Roach, are missing that inherent resilience in Hong Kong. And I said, look, Hong Kong is a vital, inherently resilient place. But just because it's come back in the past is no guarantee it will overcome the issues that I am addressing in this article. The centerpiece of my argument is an economic argument, which is what I've done for a living since I got a PhD in economics in the early 1970s. That's what I do. And I've noted that the ups and downs of the Hong Kong economy, which are a proxy for the earnings that investors calculate in assessing risk in the Hong Kong stock market, the ups and downs of the Hong Kong economy are almost one-for-one aligned with the ups and downs of the Chinese economy. The growth rate of China has decelerated by about 3.5 percentage points, from 10 to 6.5 over the last dozen years. China used to be a 10% growth machine, and the average for the past 12 years has been 6.5, a deceleration of 3.5 points. Over that same identical period, the Hong Kong growth numbers have decelerated by, guess what, 3.5 points. 1 for 1. Hong Kong, can it defy this linkage in the years ahead? I think not. And yet the case for resilience says that Hong Kong should now rise from the slowdown that it's experienced and grow far more rapidly, even though prospects for China are not for 6.5% going forward, but for a weaker growth trajectory. So how can China slow further and Hong Kong reaccelerate? That's the essence of my argument. And those who are sort of blindly pounding the table for a replay of Hong Kong's great historic resilience are overlooking that. And so the next piece that I'm writing is going to address these potential sources of resilience. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to conclude that the case for resilience is a very weak one. That if China continues to grow slowly and even slow down further, that Hong Kong will do that as well.
We will definitely touch on, or go more in depth about the China economy. But let me go back a little bit to Hong Kong. So not only, the linkage of the Chinese and the Hong Kong economy, but also you have right now the passage of Article 23, and a lot of people, including us, we have published articles after articles saying that, please, watch out, Hong Kong government, because this will affect investor confidence. So you have to deal with it very carefully, because once the market confidence is, take a nosedive down, it's very difficult for, an official position to, rally it back up. So what do you think of the Article 23 effect? What are your projections for the Hong Kong future with now this new law in effect?
Look, there's more to the future of Hong Kong than Article 23. I realize there's a lot of hand-wringing over Article 23 having just been enacted a little less than a week ago. And my point here is that given my economic case, Hong Kong policymakers need autonomy to chart their own course that would reinforce the resilience that has made Hong Kong great over many, many decades. Will Article 23 provide Hong Kong policymakers with this platform of political and policy autonomy to implement, take actions that will allow Hong Kong to spring back, as the case of resilience suggests is Hong Kong's knack over the years? It's always possible. But I worry about Article 23 in the context of a brain drain of expats that's already going on, in the context of a U.S.-China conflict which is squeezing the engine of Hong Kong trade, and So I'm still stuck. I mean, one potential source of resilience that many have cited is Hong Kong's key role in the Greater Bay Area, which of course is a big mainland urbanization, agglomeration initiative. And, you know, I think the Greater Bay Area is an important concept, but by no means is Hong Kong going to be the most dynamic piece of a large pan-regional agglomeration that also includes Shenzhen and Guangzhou, which are larger and with broader economic bases. I think the risk of the Greater Bay Area is that Hong Kong gets marginalized as another large Chinese city rather than it gets injected by a new source of dynamism. I think it's premature to jump to those conclusions. Hong Kong's role in the Greater Bay Area does not necessarily entail compromising its own legal-based foundation, nor does it entail compromising its role as a financial center with direct ties to the mainland. It may well be that over the years that some of these linkages, either political or financial, get modified in response to the political shifts that are now going on, but it's premature to conclude that that is a certainty in any way whatsoever, and we'll have to wait and see.
But looking into your crystal ball, would it be correct to say that the cost for foreign businesses to still do business in Hong Kong increased as the geopolitical tensions keeps increasing?
Look, you know, political risk is always the cost of doing business in a foreign nation for any multinational. And political risk is clearly a factor right now in shaping multinational commitment to the PRC and by inference that would also affect commitment to Hong Kong. The assessment of political risk of operating in Hong Kong was clearly shaken by the events of 2019 and are once again being drawn into question by the passage of Article 23. Hong Kong still has a large and vibrant expat community that, with professionals, very talented professionals. Many of my friends who are committed to operating in these broad multinational platforms. Whether or not those commitments will be challenged by the changing political scene, that remains to be seen. They're going to make it hard for Hong Kong to break the linkage between its economy and the mainland economy. Let me just lay out the specific details of that. I told you earlier that Chinese economic growth has averaged about 6.5% since 2011. And the 6.5 represents a sharp slowdown from the 10% over the preceding 32 years. If you use the IMF's forecast of the Chinese economic growth over the next 5 years, which is as reasonable an approximation of a baseline forecast as I can find, rather than picking a certain forecaster or company. Use the IMF numbers. They're saying that China's going to slow further from 6.5 to maybe 3.5 to 4. And here's my point on Hong Kong, the economy of Hong Kong. If China slows from the 6.5% to the 3.5 to 4, that's a further deceleration in Chinese economic growth. The extraordinarily tight linkages between Hong Kong and China suggest that it's highly unlikely that in the face of a further deceleration of mainland growth, that Hong Kong economic growth would in fact pick up. And yet, the IMF's own forecast calls for the Hong Kong economic growth rate to pick up from, say, 1.5 to 2.5 to 3% over the next 5 years. I challenge that. I'm suspicious of that. And my case for arguing against resilience because of the talent drain, the geopolitical conflict between China and the U.S., and the political pressures showing up through Article 23, I think support that conclusion. Not over the past 10 years. I would say in the past year and a half, I've become more concerned about China. I wrote an article, I think, for Project Syndicate, which is my main platform, in late December of 2022. I think it's called The Lament of a China Optimist. And I spoke about many of the things we discussed earlier. You know, my initial exposure to China during the Asian financial crisis, my early participation in the China Development Forum, my meetings with former finance minister Xiang Wai-cheng and Premier Zhu Rongji, and how that led to a very optimistic assessment. But then I said, beginning with the regulatory pressures that were put on the most dynamic piece of the private sector, the internet platform companies, in the summer of 2021. And that development in the context of shifting the emphasis and focus of economic growth back to low productivity state-owned enterprises, that got me very worried about the productivity piece of the economic argument going forward. And then the final shoe fell when the demographic population numbers were released in late 2022, early 2023, which said that the decline in the population for the overall Chinese society had begun and was occurring sooner than the demographers had expected. The way I do economics is when population declines and the workforce declines as the main piece of that population, the only way you can keep growing rapidly is to get higher productivity out of those who are still on the job. It's not a sophisticated, impenetrable concept. Workforce goes down, you want to stay growing rapidly, you have to extract more out of the existing remaining workers. And the productivity challenges in China, which are critical, are now getting attention in Beijing. A lot of the discussions that have been led by China's chief economist, a man by the name of Xi Jinping, have focused on so-called new factors of production with a clear aim to drawing conclusions for what we call total factor productivity, which is a concept that most people don't get and don't understand, but it entails getting more out of the combination of all the scarce resources than just building up their size and their scale. Sort of the magic of economic growth, the inspirational piece of economic growth that goes deep into the fabric of how economic miracles occur. That's become a new and important part of the debate. It was discussed at the China Development Forum. It was discussed at the two sessions. And I'm calling on the Chinese leadership to really deepen its commitment to understanding that and developing policies that are aligned with the need to boost productivity for a rapidly aging society that's losing a large number of workers between now and mid-century.
My last question of the day. You have been critical about China, about Hong Kong. Your remarks have ruffled feathers because these issues can be deemed sensitive back home to talk about. You now talk to us, Radio Free Asia. I learned a lot from you today, but I worry about you talking to us will bring negative impact on you because we are branded a hostile foreign forces funded by the U.S. government. Do you think, you being so outspoken will make it less willing for Chinese and Hong Kong officials to listen to you, to your advice? Do you think that, you want to go back to Hong Kong in the summer? Do you think that will become a problem now that you've been so outspoken?
Look, that's up to them. I actually wrote about this in remarks I delivered this Tuesday in Beijing. There was a closed-door session that comes right after the China Development Forum. They call it the Boji Macro Forum. And my remarks, which I think you've seen, are on my website. And I said, look, I make the difference between sort of the critical conspiracy theories that pollute the internet now and my efforts to formulate constructive criticism that is analytically grounded and empirically based. And I think debating the issues that are raised through well-intended advice that comes in the form of constructive criticism that recognizes that economists don't have the answers, but we can develop frameworks that raise important questions. That's who I am. I did that at Morgan Stanley. And by the way, that got me into trouble too, for the same reason, because they say, oh, you're offending some of our clients. They won't do business with us. I said, my job is to try to get to the truth and to maintain the credibility and integrity of my arguments. In doing that, as an economist, as a chief economist for a leading international securities firm. And I'm not going to compromise my views because I'm uneasy that someone will find that threatening to them. If constructive criticism gets distorted into uncomfortable reactions by politicians or businessmen, they need to look at that themselves as well. And if they don't want me to come back to their country or their city or their economy because I've made them uncomfortable, I'm going to keep writing and speaking and talking to platforms like RFA in an effort to get the truth out. And that'll have to stand on its own merits. The debate is more important than the personal pressures that any one individual may feel in participating in that debate. So I go back to my early days in China, my first appearance at the China Development Forum. And it was at the second meeting in 2001, where I engaged in a debate that Premier Zhu wanted to hear. And we discussed that debate openly. And I would call on the current leadership of China and Hong Kong to do the very same. Discuss the debate on its merits, not on the basis of your personal political agendas.
I think that's a wrap. That's a very good conclusion. Do you have anything to add, Steve?
I think you've exhausted me.
That is good.
I think I'm done.